Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Pack and Clint Show here on Total Coverage Sports. I'm Pack, that's Clint. Super excited for you guys to be here with us. Today we're talking a little bit of Big Ten football. We're not going to go through every single team and make them like we did for the SEC, just because, as you guys know, we're a little bit more SEC oriented. But what we are going to do is Clint and I, on our own time, we predicted every single Big Ten conference football game, including the non-cons that they were involved in. So we have their projected standings. We're going to show you guys that. We'll talk a little bit about who we think is going to end up winning the conference. We'll talk about what we think in terms of where do these Big Ten teams stack up nationally? Do we think they're, title contenders? Do we think that they're playoff contenders? Where do we kind of see them in terms of their ceiling? And then after that, we'll talk a little bit about some of the X factors in this league. We'll talk about guys that if they really hit, this team's going to be really, really damn good. And if they don't, well, that may lower the floor quite a substantial bit. So before we get into all of that, I have to ask, please like, subscribe, comment, and retweet. We really appreciate every time you guys do that. And then follow Clint at Clint J. Barrows. Follow me at Coachback _. Follow Ghost at, I believe it's Cord Samuels now. We really appreciate if you guys were to do that. But without further ado, Clint, you ready to jump in?
Yep.
Okay, so we can jump right into the projected Big Ten standings for each of us. I'll start with mine and we'll just run through it. And then Clint will go through his, and then we'll just talk a little bit about why we think it'll go out in the way that it does. So for me, I have Ohio State winning. I've got them at 11-1. I've got Indiana being second in the conference, and then I've got Oregon third, Penn State fourth. I've got Michigan fifth, Washington sixth, Maryland seventh, and then I've got Illinois eighth, Wisconsin ninth. After that, I've got UCLA at 10, Iowa at 11, USC at 12, Minnesota at 13, Michigan at 14, Rutgers at 15, Northwestern at 16, Nebraska at 17, and I've got Purdue finishing last at 18th. And Clint, if you want to run through yours really quick too.
Yeah, so just like you, I got Ohio State at number 1. I flipped Oregon and Indiana from what you have. So I have Ohio State and Oregon in the championship game. And then 4 through 7, you got Michigan, Penn State, USC, UCLA. I think they're all really good teams. 9, Illinois. 10, Wisconsin. I think they'll be much better this year. 11, Washington. 12, Minnesota. 13, Nebraska. 14, Michigan State. I got 15 Northwestern, 16 Purdue, 17 Maryland, and 18 Rutgers.
Yeah, so I'll just start off with one of the big discrepancies that you and I have is where we have UCLA. So in terms of what I had them from a record prediction, I had them going 4-5 in the Big Ten and 7-5 overall. Do you know what you had them at?
I had them at 7-5, but going 5-4.
Okay. So for me, I think my big thing is one, I'm not really a big Jaden Maeva guy. I think one of the problems.
It's UCLA's Nico. Wait, are you saying
I
USC
meant
or UCLA?
USC. Yeah, I meant USC.
USC. I had them going 8-4 and 5-4.
Okay, so pretty similar. So for me, I think the big thing with is I'm not a big Maeva fan, and that stems from the fact that when you watch him, I think there's too many moments where he tries to do too much, where out of structure, he'll put the ball up in harm's way. He'll take too many risks. I don't think he always sees it that well either. I think he can get caught on a first read quite a bit, and you'll see that in his footwork where they'll ask him to go 3+1 from a footwork standpoint. So a 3-step drop and then one hitch ball out, and then you move. If you're not going to throw it off that first hit, it's for every hitch you want to get to a new spot in the progression. Well, for Maeva, you'll see him stick on that first read for a hitch too long. So when that ball is supposed to be out on that first hitch, it gets out on the second. When he's trying to get to a third read on that third hitch, what's taking him to the fourth or fifth, and you can't really do that against some of the defenses in the Big Ten, especially as they slowly shift away from being Superman heavy and are getting into more and more of mixing coverage, disguising a little bit more, running those non-traditional Tampas, disguising out of cover three where they're going from middle field open to another form of middle field open, or they're going from middle field close to different middle field closed shell, and not the static middle field open to middle field closed shells where you're going from two high to one high. And so, when you're late a lot and you're facing disguises, that doesn't typically work very well. Where if you're late on a throw and zone and they see that, you're gonna turn the ball over, and you've seen that with him against Notre Dame, against Oregon, against a lot of the best teams that they've played. So I'm not. So that for me is one of the big things, and it's also a brutal schedule. They play Indiana, Oregon, Penn State, Wisconsin, and then they also play Ohio State. So when you look at the totality of the schedule, it's pretty easy to see why it is somewhat easy to see why they would struggle. And for me, that's why I have them as low as I do. Where I think they're really talented, but when you look at some of the deficiencies that they have, and you look at some of the areas of concern, you can't really do that against some of the teams that they're going to play, and some of the really good teams that they're going to end up seeing.
Yeah, so the reason why, even though our records are very, very close to each other, the reason why I have them at 6 is one thing that I've noticed with Lincoln Riley, not just at USC, but throughout his whole career, is rarely do you see him lose against teams that they shouldn't lose against. So the only times I can really think of, you have 2017 Iowa State. You have that little 2-year back-to-back stretch where they lost to Kansas State in 2020 and 2019. Other than that, though, in the Big 12, you never saw it. And then even in the Big 10, if you look at last year's team, for example, I had it just pulled up. Give me a second.
No, you're good. I'll beyond that, I think one of the big guys that I think for them is really going to make or break their season is they already lost one of their offensive tackles for the year. Lincoln Riley talked a little bit about that for them. So that's one that they're really going to need to that they're going to need to figure out a replacement for. I'm forgetting his name right now, but they lost a tackle a few days ago. That's a pretty big deal for them. And then the other one is, well, what is their defensive line going to look like, right? Because it's felt like every time they've played, I mean, for when they played Illinois last year, they got bullied in the trenches. They could not stop the run, and that's why they lost that game. If you look at against Oregon, Oregon was able to consistently sustain the run game. So you've got to figure out ways that you've got to figure out ways to be able to hold up in the trenches. And then the thing for me from a schematic standpoint is last year and even the year before, I felt like USC was very, very gap scheme heavy, a lot of counter, a lot of power, a lot of insert ISO. You didn't really see a whole lot of true zone scheme. That to me is something I'm interested in is do they get any do they try to add any zone scheme in there? Because they're a little bit of a unique offense in terms of the fact that there's a lot of air raid principles in there, but they're also a pretty heavy pro style team in terms of some of the concepts that they run. They're basically a pro spread. Do they do anything there in terms of, well, are they able to add anything to the run game, and then are they able to be a little bit tougher in terms of the defensive line?
Yeah, so I got the schedule pulled up. The losses they had last year, you had at 23 Illinois when they were ranked 21. So you have a very close matchup there, a ranked team. At number 13 Notre Dame when they were number 20. So you're not projected to win that. And then at number 7 Oregon when you're number 15. So I mean, all their losses last year, they were. I'm not going to include TCU because you don't really get a full game with those bowl games, but in terms of all the regular season games they played, they were understandable losses. They weren't like, how the hell did you lose that game? And that's what's been for most of his career. And then having Gary Patterson come in as the defensive coordinator, I think is a huge move for them. Historically, throughout his whole career, he's been great on defense. Even if you just look at in 2022 when he came to assist Texas, the defense greatly improved from the year before, which was a horrible defense to say the least. And then also, I like a lot of the guys they have on offense. I myself, I'm kind of back and forth on Jaden Mayava. I think he has a lot of talent. I just think that his ability to read a field is still questionable. And then I like that they bring back King Miller, who was just under 1,000 yards last year. I think he was a really good back for them. Um, and then the transfer that they bring in from North Carolina State, Terrell Anderson, he should bring an impact. I think the biggest player, though, for me that's going to make or break for them is actually going to be Mark Bowman, the freshman coming in, because you lose a tight end last year in Lake McCree who brought you a lot of production for a lot of years. I mean, he was at USC for a while doing what he did. So I think what they replace at the tight end position is going to be the biggest factor on if they're good or not. Because obviously, like you lose your guys in the wide receiver room last year, like Jacoby Lane and Makai Lemon, who were huge contributors. But I think that what happens in the tight end room is going to affect the team the most.
I think that's totally fair. The other one that stands out is we both have Ohio State first, with one of the toughest schedules in the entire country. If you look at in terms of the coaches poll, the top six, Ohio State plays three of them, and they're in the top six. So they play 60% of the teams that aren't in the that are in the top five. That's not them. So, Clint, why don't you talk first about why you have Ohio State winning the conference, then, or being in first after the regular season? Then I'll talk a little bit about why it works for me.
Yeah, so this all ended up just turning out the way it did, just purely based off of tiebreakers. Um, I had both all three of Ohio State, Oregon, and Indiana at 8-1 in conference play. But just the way the tiebreakers came out, that's how it was. But the reason why I'm really high on this team is because you bring back a back who was amazing last year in Bo Jackson. That's the first off. Julian Sayin, I'm not super impressed on as a quarterback. I think slightly overrated. Um, but then you also look at the wide receiver room who um, on paper should be amazing next year, in my opinion. You have Chris Henry Jr., who should be really damn good. You have Jeremiah Smith, obviously, who's the biggest name that's returning out of that group. You bring back Brandon Innes, who, although his numbers aren't super flashy, he's a good receiver. You also bring in a transfer in Devin McEwen from UTSA, who gave them a lot of production. And you bring in Kyle Parker from LSU. The one problem I'm going to have with this team on offense, at least, is, and I've talked about this with you, I've probably talked about on here before, is I don't like Cortez Hankton as a wide receiver coach. If you look at his first couple of years at LSU, you can say, oh, well, he helped produce Malik Neighbors, he helped produce like all these type of players, when a lot of that was the previous wide receiver coach's development. And when you look at like last year with, which granted, you had a half-injured QB for most of the year. They weren't producing at all. Even the year before, besides Kawan Lacey and Aaron Anderson, you didn't really have much production going on in the wide receiver room at all. So um, it's just historically from where he's been, I don't think he's done an amazing job. But then you also you bring back guys like Daniel Phillips, who were an All Big Ten tackle last year, and the O line should be good, which is kind of the saving grace from the wide receiving coaching situation. But overall, I think they're a really good team. Um, a Ryan Day coach team is always going to be a good team. I don't see any team that he ever coaches being under 10 wins, to be completely honest. So I think they're going to be really good, and I think this is just how it's going to play out.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I'll add a few little things in terms of why I have them finishing the regular season in first. So I actually have them going 9-0 in the in conference play. I have them going 11-1 in total. And for me, I think the thing that's going to help them the most is, they're breaking in something like nine starters that are new defensively, right? They lost obviously Arvell Reese, Sonny Styles, Caleb Downs, um, the the really big nose tackle whose name is forgetting me for some reason. Um, they lose both of their line. They lost both their linebackers. They lose Lorenzo Styles as well. And so, they lost something like 7 or 8 starters from the best defense or one of the best defenses in the country. So, that certainly plays a part there for me, in terms of some of the questions I have. But I think the thing that helps them the most is they play Indiana in mid-October, so they get time to, really gel with their guys. They get time to figure some things out. And then the other thing is, I'm pretty high on what their secondary is going to be. I'm not the biggest fan of Jermaine Matthews. I think he plays with his chest out in front too high. I think he's got pretty poor pad level in some when he's playing in off coverage. But I think Devin Sanchez is going to be really really good. When I watched him initially last year, I didn't love the tape, and then I watched him again about a week ago, and I thought he looked really good. I thought he did a lot of things really well in terms of he understood how to stay low when he's working out of off coverage, keeping his chest over his toes. He did a good job of understanding when guys are breaking his cushion and when to start getting into his crossover run. Felt like he did a good job of fighting for the ball and tracking the ball where he didn't look uncomfortable with the ball in the air. And he did a really good job of when guys were being physical with him, being physical with them. So, I was more impressed with him than maybe I think I gave him credit for initially. And then Jalen McClain's a really good safety. Terry Moore was really good when he was healthy for Duke. Earl Little's a little bit of a up and down player, but all in all, I think they're going to be, I don't know that they're going to be as good defensively, but I do think they're going to be better offensively. And I know that a lot of people don't have the highest opinion of Arthur Smith, but if there's one thing he does really well is he develops a really good run game. And if you can develop a really good run game and you combine that with the fact that it's a Ryan Day offense, you're gonna have a lot of solutions. And so to me, I think that's the big thing. And in the past 10 years, they've lost 2 home games that aren't Michigan. So you don't go there often and win. And so that's why I have them beating Ohio. That's why I have them beating Oregon, and that ends up putting them at 9-0 in terms of finishing the conference regular season in first place.
Yeah, for them to finish 9-0, with the schedule they have would be really damn impressive. I mean, we're taking away the non-conference, the at Texas game, but even then, you still go to Indiana. You have Oregon, you have Michigan. You even have some sneaky tough games like going to Iowa
Yeah.
and to USC, which Iowa, they always have a game every year where they can pull off an upset.
Yeah, it's hard to play at Kinnick.
Yeah. Um, Other than that, the only other big discrepancy I see on this list is where we have Maryland placed at. Um, so I can explain why I have them so low to start. This is all kind of just based off of trends that have happened with Maryland over the last couple of years. This kind of even predates Mike Locksley, to be completely honest. Even if you go back to when they had DJ Durkin, and I believe Matt Canada was also a head coach at some point for them for a little bit. But either way, they start off a year really hot, and then once conference play starts, or they've played their first conference game, it just goes downhill. Last year, they start off 4-0, and then they lose the last 8 games of the season. Um, they've done that a pretty good amount to where they'll lose like all but one of their last like 7 or 8 games. The past couple of seasons, the only season they didn't was when I think they beat Auburn, and I forgot what bowl game it was, but it was like a bowl game where both teams were 6-6. So other than that, you haven't seen much happen with them. Now, do they have a lot of talent? I think Malik Washington's a good quarterback. They do bring in a good transfer whose name I can't pronounce, and I'm not going to try to pronounce um, at wide receiver. But I can't trust Loxley. I have to see him actually have consistent, continued success, which is why I have them so low and why I think that by the end of the year he likely is gone.
Yeah, I think that's totally fair. For me, I think it's one, I buy some of what they are going to be defensively. And I say that because, one, I think they got a really highly touted recruit out of high school in Zion Ely. I think, for one, that's going to help them a ton on third down when they're trying to rush the passer. But even another guy that played last year as a freshman and played really well is Zahir Mathis. I think he's a really good player. I don't love their secondary, but I don't think it's a bad secondary either. They're returning a lot of guys in terms of their backfield. A lot of their guys are either seniors or they played last year, so that always helps. I think they're going to be good defensively, and then I'm a really big fan of Malik Washington. And so for me, when you bring a ton back from a continuity standpoint defensively, and then you get another year with your quarterback who played really well last year, I do think that leads to, having a better season than people may expect. And to be quite frank, they don't have the world's toughest schedule. They don't play many of the supposed top teams in the conference, and so that's the big one for me in terms of why I view them in the way that I do. So really, to me, it's buying stock in Malik Washington at a higher level than maybe even you do, and then believing in some of the continuity that they have from a defensive perspective, and then really, I think the big one that maybe will be interesting for people to talk about is Penn State at 4, obviously a new head coach, and then even Michigan. And for me with Penn State, it's just the schedule is so easy. It's not even that I think Penn State's, a great football team. I think you'll see that when we talk about them a little bit later in our tier list section. But when you look at their schedule, they don't play any of the top 3 teams. They don't play Ohio State, Oregon, or Indiana. I think their toughest game ends up being Michigan and USC, and if they lose those 2 games, but they win every other one, they're 10-2, and that probably makes the playoff, and that's what I have them doing. I have them going 7-2 in the conference. So, and then for Michigan, I think it's a little bit of the schedule is not horrible, and I think they're going to be really good defensively. Now, I have a lot of questions about what they are offensively, and some of the reports back on Bryce Underwood are a little concerning. But, I buy that defense. I buy some of what Kyle Whittingham's going to do, especially as a good coach. So for me, that's where I have Michigan. That's what kind of where after that first 3, I think it's kind of clear who we think the 3 best teams in the conference are. But 4 and 5 for us, we both have Penn State and Michigan. We just have them in flip flop order. Is that kind of how you see it as well in terms of 2 teams that have some really high ceilings in the case of Michigan and a really easy schedule in the case of Penn State?
Yeah, so even though I'll go to Michigan, even though the reports of um, what's it called, of Bryce Underwood out of fall camp and spring weren't necessarily amazing. If he hits the ceiling like he has the potential to do, I think he can be really good. I think the team can be really good. Kyle Whittingham's is a really damn good coach. Actually, the one of the players on their team is probably my number one possible like breakout player for who can make or break a team. And I think it's gonna be Savion Hitter. I think,
Yeah.
or is it Hyder? Is it Hitter or
Hyder,
Hyder?
Hyder, yeah.
Hyder. Yeah. I think he has potential to be really good. I think they have a decently favorable schedule. I have them meeting Oklahoma, which is one of the big wins for them this year. The only 2 games I have them losing is at Oregon, at Ohio State. But like other than those 2 games, in terms of Big Ten schedule, it's pretty favorable. Besides Penn State at home, but and then Penn State. I know you aren't the biggest Matt Campbell guy, but I like him. Seeing what Iowa State was growing up and seeing what he turned them into, it's not many coaches can do what he did, in my opinion. And I think when you get a guy like that and you give him the resources that you have at a big university like Penn State with a big football history and all that, I think that um, the sky could be the limit, and for lack of better words. But I think they're both really good teams. Both have decent schedules. I just think Michigan's slightly better, but they're both pretty even to me.
Yeah, so just to touch on a comment really quick by Joshy in terms of why I have USC at 12. One, really tough schedule, right? They play Oregon, Washington, Penn State, Wisconsin, Ohio State, Indiana, Maryland, and USC. I don't think they're at the point yet in the trenches to be able to match up with Oregon, especially in terms of the Oregon defensive line. And you have to be able to beat them in the trenches to beat Oregon. When you look at the last 6 times that Oregon's lost, when we're talking about both of the Indiana games, Indiana dominated them in the trenches. When you look at that second Ohio State game in the Rose Bowl, Ohio State ran it whenever they wanted, and Oregon could not run the ball. And then both of the Washington games, Washington was able to run the ball enough to able to force Oregon out of two high split safety shells where they can play some of the man match quarters or some of the two man stuff that they wanted to, and they were forced to play a little bit more single high, and that's where you can hit some of those shots outside the way they did to Roma Dunze and the guys that they have. And so USC doesn't really have that yet, and so you can't beat Oregon there. Washington, is kind of a toss up, but then at Penn State, I probably don't pick them to win that game just because it's in Happy Valley, and it very well could be the whiteout game. And then Wisconsin in late October. Wisconsin plays a really physical brand of football, and Lincoln Riley typically struggles with those types of games. Last year at Illinois, a game that they were more talented than Illinois, but weren't able to handle them physically. I could see that happening again. And then I'm not going to pick them to beat Ohio State or Indiana, and I could pretty easily see them losing to UCLA, especially because I'm a pretty big believer in Chesney. So them losing 4 or 5 conference games, and I have them losing 5, doesn't really feel all that crazy to me, and so that's why I have them at 12.
Yeah. I don't really have anything else too much if no one has any more questions to touch on to. So if you want to get to the conference championship games, we can do that.
Yeah, so for me, it's Ohio State and Indiana, and this would be a rematch of a game that was played in October. I obviously had Ohio State winning the first one. The rematch, I would have Indiana winning. I think that you give Haynes a second shot. The second game typically tends to go pretty well for them. I think they'll figure out some of the stuff about saying, figure out looks to confuse him quite a bit. So I would have Indiana winning this game. And then for you, you have Ohio State and Oregon, another game that would be a rematch. This would have been a rematch of a game that happened in Ohio Stadium. And so, Clint, who do you have winning the Big Ten?
Yeah, so anytime I do conference championship games, I will never predict a team who, if they play in the regular season, I'm never going to predict the team who won the regular season match, especially if it was at their home stadium. I think that Oregon's a better team. I think that I'm not just gonna yap for no reason. I think that Oregon's just gonna win. I have Ohio State finishing 10-3, and then I have Oregon finishing 12-1. No team's going to go undefeated this year in college football, in my opinion, even though Indiana did it last year. But yeah,
Yeah, and to your point, the in terms of the record and rematches, the team that loses the first time is pretty likely to win, especially in conference rematches. I think it's something like of the last 40, over like 25 of them have been won by the team that lost the first matchup. So to your point, I do think it's if they play again and Ohio State wins the first, I would probably pick Oregon to win. So that kind of brings us to one of our last two segments, which is our tier list. So I'll run through mine. I'll talk a little bit about it. Clint can give some feedback if he has any, and then we'll jump over to Clint's and I'll ask him some questions based off of his. So for me, my title contenders: Oregon, Ohio State, Indiana. All to me are top 7 teams, top 8, top 9 teams in the country where they're firmly in that top tier. I don't think any one of the teams beyond them are really even quarterfinal contenders where I think they make the playoff, and in that first round, I would expect them to lose. I don't really buy any of those teams as real playoff national title fighting teams. And then teams that I think are going to be in that playoff hunt: Michigan, Penn State, USC, and Washington. We didn't talk too much about Washington, so I'll do that right now. One, Ryan Walters is one of the best defensive coordinators in the country. I think he does a really good job of adapting to his personnel and adapting his scheme. Where at Illinois, there was a lot of penny fronts, a lot of 5-1 stuff where they're putting 5 guys on the line of scrimmage, having one linebacker, and playing a lot of cover one. Well, last year, they changed what they did. They mixed and matched a lot of different coverages. They play a lot more 3 high as well. So they did some stuff in terms of getting to 3 high. They brought some 6-man pressures with 3 deep, 2 under, which is known as eyes pressures. They used 5-man man pressures. They played blitz coverage or cover 0. they did a lot of different things to really adapt to their personnel, and they didn't play nearly as much cover one as they did last year because of some of the guys that they had with Sakaro Davis and Firins. Who I can't pronounce that name, but the other one who has, I think it's a Polynesian last name, and I'm not going to try to butcher it again, but they had really long corners that were really good in zone coverage. They played a lot of that last year, so I think defensively, they were a top 20-ish unit last year. I expect them to get even better. I think their D line is going to be good. I think they're going to be, roughly a top 10-ish unit and top 10, top 15. And when you bring back Damon Williams, who, for as much as I don't love him and as many of the problems as I think he has, I also think that, you know, he's athletic enough to where he can win you a few games. And so that's why I have them being in that kind of next range of being a pseudo playoff contender. And then jumping into 8-4, really the 8-4 section is a little bit less about them being 8-4 and really more about that mid tier. I can see them winning anywhere from 6 to 8 games, and for me, that's Illinois, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Iowa, UCLA, and Maryland. I talked a little bit about Maryland earlier. Talking about Wisconsin, one, a tremendous linebacker room, two of the most underrated players in all of America in Mason Posa and Cooper Catalano, two absolute studs. They're going to be good in the secondary. I think their defensive line is pretty underrated too. So I think they're going to be, one of the better teams in the entire country defensively. They were top 25 last year. I think they're going to be top 20, top 15 in that department this year. And then offensively, for them, the big thing is, can they just stay healthy? And I'm banking on them staying healthy at quarterback, where last 2 years and really last 3 years, they haven't been able to sustain any level of their quarterback staying healthy. And so if they can do that, I think they're going to be pretty good defensively or pretty good offensively. And they have a pretty light schedule. So them winning 8 games is not exactly the craziest thing in the world. So that's why I have them in that tier. And then talking a little bit about Rutgers, Purdue, Northwestern, Michigan State, and Nebraska. Nebraska, I kind of view them as hitting the downward part of the inflection point where, when they struggled last year post Raiola and then lost him, that to me really feels like the inflection point where it's kind of going downhill, because you look at some of the guys they've taken in the portal, haven't really developed at maybe the rate you would have hoped. A guy like William Nwaneri, who was really, really highly touted coming out in that 2024 class and really hasn't popped a whole lot yet. So to me, I got a lot of questions about them. I'm selling stock on them. And then Rutgers, it says bad, but they've been 7-5, 6-6 the last few years, and I kind of think that's what they're still going to be. I think they're a good team, but they kind of lack that talent, and they're kind of one of those elevated G5s at this point, where every year that they have a really good player, a good season, you expect them to lose their guys, and then for Northwestern and for Michigan State, it's just they have new head coaches, and they're not very talented yet. And then Purdue's just not talented at all. So that for me is how my tier list works out. Clint, any questions before we jump over to yours in terms of things that you see that maybe you'd like to get my any questions you have about my list in terms of stuff maybe being a bit interesting to you?
Not really any questions. I kind of agree with most of it. I guess my question is why, like, do you think Washington's not 8-4, and why do you think they're a playoff contender?
Yeah, to me, I think it's just I think I buy the defense being good enough to win them some of those lower scoring games where the offense inevitably struggles. And I think the other thing too is maybe I buy a little bit of Damon Williams playing a little bit better and not having as many issues as he did last year, where last year it really felt like if he didn't have the first read, he was going to scramble. It was a one read and run type of thing, and you can't do that when you're facing linebackers that are just as good of an athlete as you. Where I think maybe this year you see some maturation there. You see him get a little bit better and avoid some of that, and as a result, being a little bit more efficient offensively. Where they were pretty good against Oregon, where they gave up 26 points, but Oregon really had to work for those 26, and they didn't. It wasn't like they were getting whatever they wanted in that game. Like they got consistent stops, and so to me, I think that's really it. It's I buy that there's maybe a little bit of progression from Demond Williams, and I buy their defense being really really good.
This is perfect with my last tiers named. Start thinking about 2027. Yeah, they're both going to be pretty bad teams, in my opinion, but I'll get to that in a second. So, just starting off with the top three, it's the same as you. Got Ohio State, Oregon, Indiana. Don't think I need to touch on that much. Rename the tiers a bit. I got playoff contenders, so teams I think they're kind of fringe teams where they might make it, might not, depends on how the committee views them. But they will have near around like certain records to where they could be able to make it. Michigan, I have them with a record there where they could make it. I think teams that if one game goes a certain way could make it USC and Penn State. I don't think both of them could have the possibility to. Teams that are good, they'll make a decent bowl game, but they're not going to be competing for a playoff spot. They're not going to be really close to missing a bowl. I think UCLA is going to be good. We agreed on that. I think Iowa is going to be good. They're always good. You don't see them miss a bowl ever, even
Yeah.
though they have probably the most anemic offense I've ever watched. Illinois, you have them bring in Caden Hauser. I feel like Illinois with Brett Bielema, they're always just going to hover around this range. I think Altmaier and Hauser, the difference between them two is not too great in my opinion. And then you have Nebraska, who I actually kind of do think Calandria could be good at Nebraska. I kind of like Matt Rule as a coach. It's just like he had that pattern at every other school he was at, like Temple, for example, where first year was like 111, second year you're like 500, then next year you're really good. He had that at both Baylor and Temple. You haven't seen that in Nebraska yet. So it's interesting to see how they do post Raiola because, as you pointed at, once Raiola got out last year, they really went downhill, which makes me think I should have put Nebraska lower. But I digress. Wisconsin, Washington, Minnesota, I think they're all going to be on the similar level around 7-5, 6-6 ish. This tier is just for teams that are going to be very fringe bowl teams. If one game goes a certain way, they might not make one. So all these teams that are above the last tier, they're making bowl games, and then the ones below on the last tier, they're not going to make a bowl game. Purdue, I don't see any reason why I think Brian Brown should be a lot better than he was last year at all. Rutgers, you lose Calic Manis after it feels like freaking forever. And I'm guessing AJ Sarras is going to be their quarterback. I don't know. Greg Schiano, I mean, he's one of the better coaches they've had, which doesn't say much at all for their university. They are kind of what you said, a glorified G5 team. When they were in the Big East, they got added, and those conferences like that, like the Big East back then, you had the teams in there who were seen as power teams and the teams that weren't. It's kind of like when Notre Dame, BYU were independent. Notre Dame was seen as like a power team, and BYU was kind of seen as a group of five. But then you have Northwestern. They bring in Aiden Childs from Michigan State, which that's probably the most lateral move you can get at quarterback. I don't think Aiden Childs was anything spectacular at all. I know a lot of people are high on him. I never saw anything that made me super impressed with him at all. Michigan State, speaking of, I think their quarterback's gonna be Alessio Milige. I don't know how to pronounce his last name. But you bring in Pat Fitzgerald, who I think is a good coach. He did well at Northwestern, took them to 2 Big Ten championship games. So I'm curious to see how he does here. I think eventually they'll be good, but I think this year there's gonna be some growing pains, and it's gonna be probably like 5-7. Like Josh, you said, did I have them at 5-7? I think I did. Yeah, I did have them at 5-7. All right, and then the last one, Maryland. They have my worst record in the Big Ten. I don't think Mike Locksley's a good coach. I just think that this team, there's nothing in my opinion that makes me think that they're going to really change what has happened the past couple years. Even though, like we talked about, Malik Washington's a good player and they bring in a good defense, it's just I just need to see it first. And I'm with a team like Maryland. I'm fine with being proved wrong. So that's just my tier list.
Yeah, so I'm not realizing we didn't talk a whole lot about UCLA. I think we're both pretty high on them. One, I think we both really like Bob Chesney. I
Mhm.
assume you really like him. And then for me, that's really where it starts and almost where it ends is I just have a lot of faith in Bob Chesney. One, I really like their defensive coordinator, Colin Hitchler. I watched him a lot when he was at JMU and even when he was involved with Wisconsin a few years ago and even when he was with Alabama 2 years ago, I think he do a really good job of, again, mixing in a lot of different things where they'll play some non-traditional Tampa stuff, they'll play some, static cover 3, they'll play some disguised forms of Tampa in addition to their non-traditional Tampas. They'll bring a ton of pressure, they'll play cover 1, they'll play some match coverage, some quarters. So they do a lot of things to show you a lot of looks, and everywhere he's gone, he's done a good job of elevating his talent. I think he's going to do the same thing when he's now going to be at UCLA, and then I think Nico Imaliava is going to benefit from having Bob Chesney having a little bit more stability, being in the same place and having some continuity, having started a full year under that system. I think that's going to really benefit him. So for me, that's why I'm higher on UCLA and why I have him in that kind of same tier as you, which is that good tier.
Yeah, so I'm very similar with you. I like Bob Chesney. I like what he did at JMU, and not only like because at the start, obviously you saw Nico really struggle last year. You think they may be the worst team in the country, going 0-12 after dropping games to Utah, UNLV, New Mexico, Northwestern. But then you see it, Nico at certain points really start to look like what he can be. Um, you bring in a competent coach who before you had Deshaun Foster, who I don't even think he really wanted the job from my understanding. Um, so yeah, you have half the year of last year with not even a head coach, which they ended up pulling off 3 wins. But I think this year, who I think is one of the biggest transfers and one of the most underrated is Wayne Knight from James Madison. This guy, he had around I think 1.4 thousand rushing yards last year. If he can continue that in the Big Ten, um, that is going to be huge for them. You bring in two really good receivers, in my opinion, in Leland Smith and Landon Ellis. They're both solid guys. They're definitely going to get you what you need. And I think that even their schedule is, in my opinion, it's decently favorable. I think the only really top tier team you have to play and for them is at Oregon. But then you have like at Michigan, and after that, it's pretty easy. You have USC at home. You have Wisconsin State, not Wisconsin State, Michigan State, Nevada, Illinois, at Maryland. I mean, you have a pretty peachy road for most of the season. So I think they'll definitely improve, and I think that they'll be in a pretty decent bowl game, like a Rely Quest Bowl or a Citrus Bowl.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I think we can jump into our last portion of the show, which is going to be guys that we think are going to be X factors. Clint and I both have 3 or 4 or 5 guys that we think are really going to tell kind of the story of what each team's ceiling ends up being. For me, I think the first one is going to be for me Amari Washington, the defensive tackle for Oregon. And I say that because one of the things that you notice with one of the things you noticed last year with Oregon was, they had good defensive line play. I think it was a little overrated, honestly, from what the national media seems to tell you. It felt like, at times they got pushed back, especially in those Indiana games where they weren't resetting the line of scrimmage very often from a defensive perspective, and they were getting reset a lot. Um, and with Amari, it was a lot of there's a lot of flash plays there, but there's not a whole lot. And really, the flash plays were like maybe once a game he would do something that was freakish. It wasn't consistent enough, and if he can reach a certain level of consistency, that Oregon defensive line is going to be really good because by the end of the year, Bear Alexander was playing really good football, and to be blunt, playing better football than Amari Washington. So that to me is a really big deal. Is can they get Amari Washington to be consistent? Because if they can, he's really talented. He's going to be a first round draft pick. So if they can get him playing at a consistently high level, that's going to be a really, really big deal for them. That's my first factor. My second one is whoever the second cornerback for Ohio State is. If they can figure out a way to be any good at all, that defense will be really good again because they've got one of the best defensive coordinators in all of football in Matt Patricia. They got one of the best. He's going to do a great job of not only teaching and making sure that his players are consistently executing at a really high level, which they did last year at maybe the highest level in the country outside of Indiana. But he's going to do a good job of building the scheme around them and using them in terms of what they do well. And so they need that second corner to play really well. And if they can get a second really good corner, that allows them to, and even a third corner, that allows them to play a little bit more dime. And when you look at what their DB room is, how many players that they have, the more dime they can play, that'd be a good sign for them because that's when Patricia can really get into his bag from a coverage standpoint in terms of all the different looks and all the different things that they can show you. So that to me is the big one is can they be good there? Can they be good at that second cornerback spot? And can they be good enough at the third cornerback spot to allow them on third down to get into dime and be able to do some of the different things that I think they need to be able to do in order to be really great because they're not a super big simulated pressure team. That isn't what they were last year. So when you're not a super big simulated pressure team, you have to be pretty creative and you have to be really damn good at DB to get away with that. And if they can, they're going to be it's going to be another year where they can fight for a national title. And then the third guy for me is it's kind of an obvious one, but it's Josh Hoover. What type of regression does Indiana see from a quarterback standpoint going from Mendoza to Hoover? If Hoover's great, they're going to be just as good as they were last year because the defense is going to be really, really damn good for Indiana. And if he's not anything like Mendoza, can he cut down on the turnovers at least? Because if he doesn't cut down on the turnovers, they go from an 11-1 team to probably a 10-2 team for me. And then the fourth guy is going to be also a quarterback is Jaden Maeva. How many does he clean up any of the turnover disasters that he had last year? If he can do that, then that changes quite a bit for them. If he can't, then they're gonna struggle, and I don't think he will clean up those turnover problems, which is why I have them finishing 12th in the conference. And then the last guy that I'll mention is again you mentioned him earlier. It's Savion Hyder. To me, if Michigan can be able to consistently run the ball and consistently run the ball at a high level, that means that one, Savion Hyder was really good and Savion Hyder was really explosive. And if they can do that, what that means is it's less stress on Bryce Underwood. It's less things that they're going to need to ask him to do. And to me, I think for Michigan, the biggest thing that they're going to need to do is mitigate the amount of things that Bryce Underwood has to do. You have to allow him to do as little as possible because to me, I view him very similar to the way I viewed Marcel Reed last year and probably still do. They're quarterbacks that will lose you a game. They will willingly and will always try to lose football games for their team. And it's pretty rare that they're going to win the game for their team. And so you have to do things to mitigate the amount of stress that's put on them so that way they don't lose you a football game. And so that's why Savion Hyder for me is the fifth guy that really will make or break the Michigan season. And so those are my five guys. I'll toss it over to Clint to give his five, and then we'll wrap up and head out.
Yeah, so my first guy was your last guy, Savion Hyder. It's going to be for pretty much all the same reasons. If they're not able to run the ball and Savion Hyder's not the back that they're expecting him to be or that he has the potential to be, the team is not going to be able to reach its ceiling, and they're going to go about 8-4 and be in a similar place that they were last year. My second one is Chris Henry for Ohio State. I think besides Jeremiah Smith, over the last few years, you've lost amazing receivers in Emeka Egbuka, Carnell Tate, and you even lose a great tight end, Max Clare, last year. So you lose a lot of big weapons that Julian Sain was throwing to. You do bring in Brandon Innes, but he wasn't as involved as a lot of the guys that I mentioned. And then Chris Henry, I mean, if he isn't able to explode on the scene and do really well for them, then Julian Sand's gonna have a little bit of a rough year because when teams get pressure on him and um, they're able to take away some of his early reads, he has a hard time playing. You saw it in Miami and Indiana. He didn't play well in either of those games. So that's my second one. My third one I already mentioned earlier. It's Mark Bowman for USC. I think that is the biggest. Okay, that's not the biggest loss. Makai Lemon is the biggest loss, but I think that the tight end position is probably one of the most unknown factors of their team. And I think that depending on how he plays this year, I think that will determine the limit for USC. The fourth one is Nick Marsh for Indiana, the transfer from Michigan State. I think that how he plays is going to determine how they do this year. You lose a really good receiver in Omar Cooper, who was their leader last year. But you bring back Charlie Becker, who's a really solid receiver too. So I could have put him on this list, but I'm trying to think of guys who didn't play in the league last year. So yeah, Nick Marsh. It's gonna be interesting to see what he can do as a newcomer. And then fifth one is Rocco Beck for me at Penn State. You're gonna see difference with Big Ten defenses and Big 12 defenses, and especially at the talent level too, because the talent level you're getting the Big Ten for the most part, or Big 12, you're playing 3 stars, fringe 4 stars. You're not playing the most athletic guys. Whereas when you go when Penn State plays and Rocco Beck is playing in the Big Ten, he's gonna be playing guys who Penn State's schedule is so easy. Okay, I don't know about the 5 stars and all that anymore, but he'll be playing some high 4 stars. You have some good games at Michigan, at Washington, USC. So like you have some good opponents in there, but like the talent level is going to be higher in the Big Ten. So I'm interested to see how he does. Honorable mentions for me. It was another guy on Penn State, Carson Hansen, the running back. See how he does. And then I would say the last honorable mention for me, I guess just whatever running back Iowa has this year.
Yeah, it's not a
Yeah,
bad shot at all.
that's about it for me.
Okay, cool. So, thank you guys for being here. That's going to be all for Clint and I. Went about 50 minutes. Appreciate everyone who did show up. Before we head out, please like, subscribe, comment, um, and then please retweet the Twitter channel. Follow Clint at Clint J Barrows. Follow me at CoachBack_. I really appreciate you guys being here, and we'll see you guys again next Tuesday. We'll be talking a little bit of ACC and Big 12 football. And then remember, the week after that is when Clint and I are going to go through our entire playoff predictions. We're going to go through who we think is going to win the national championship. We'll talk a little bit about some of the big awards and who we think is going to end up walking away with those. And before you know it, the season will be here. Obviously, fall camp. Next week, we may talk a little bit about fall camp reporting from some of the teams that we'll talk about next week. Obviously, we'll talk a little bit about some of the biggest programs, maybe a little bit more in depth. But thank you guys for being here, and see you guys again next Tuesday.